Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, Prime Minister Mark Carney has cut a deal with China that's left Doug Ford steaming over electric vehicles.
Ontario is looking to pause a zoning policy that forced developers to build affordable homes near transit hubs.
My pal JMM was at ROMA this week, the annual conference of the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, and he'll give us all the 411 on that.
And in your column, my column, I'll take a deeper look at what was gained and lost in the agreement with China.
And I'm still focused on the Ontario Liberal leadership, asking the question, is it time for the party to make a real outside-the-box choice?
It's Friday, January 23rd, 2026, so let's get to it.
JMM.
Oh, sir.
First sugar, not of the new year, but of the new set.
Yes.
We are in a new digs.
We are back in the Bill Davis studio, where, TVO makes all of its best TV, I think.
I would like to think so, or some of it anyway.
They've done a great job rehabbing the place.
This is our new permanent home.
Yes.
As opposed to the closet up on the 5th floor where we've been for the last few months anyway.
We did our best and it served its purpose. But yes, it's nice to be in a more dedicated space.
And for this dedicated space, we have brought out dedicated T-shirts. What are you wearing today?
So this is a T-shirt that one of our listeners gave me a few months ago now, but it's a reference to the turbo train of CN in, I want to say 1960s or 1970s. I've forgotten already. But this week, Alto, the federal organization that is building is slated to build a high-speed rail line between Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. They've started doing their sort of public consultations about what they are proposing to move forward. And there's lots of interesting stuff in there. Frankly, some stuff looks, I will say, dubious to me. But in any case, we are once again talking about building high-speed rail. And so I thought I would break out this shirt once again. I'm not super confident that I will ever actually board high-speed rail in Canada. I'm not confident my child will either. But, let's just take a moment to live in hope.
Okay, I like living in hope. That's fine.
And you're wearing?
Well, in the United States, they have Martin Luther King. And in Canada, I'm going to stand up here, we have Lincoln Alexander. Lincoln Alexander, look, he's always been one of my favorite former politicians. He is such a pioneer in the history of this country. He is the first ever black member of parliament in Canadian history. He represented Hamilton West, so I knew him. Well, I've known him for a long time. He first got elected in the year of Trudeau-mania, 1968, as a progressive conservative in Hamilton. Tough to do, but he did it. He was the first black cabinet minister in Canadian history in Joe Clark's 1979 government. He was the first black lieutenant governor of Ontario. And that's obviously what his beautiful regalia that he's wearing in this portrait that I have on my shirt of him. His name is on the law school of Toronto Metropolitan University. And of course, given his initials, it didn't take long for the school to be nicknamed LA Law, which for those of us who are of a certain vintage, that was a great TV show about 40 years ago, yes. I think, coming out of the United States. Why am I wearing him today? Okay, in December of 2013, the legislature of Ontario proclaimed January 21st, his birthday, Lincoln Alexander Day in Ontario. And in December 2014, Parliament passed a law designating January 21st as Lincoln Alexander Day across the whole country. So it was observed for the first time in 2015, and this is the 12th, January 21st anyway, was the 12th Lincoln Alexander Day in all of Canada. And you know what? Martin Luther King, appropriately so, gets a great deal of attention in the United States for the contribution he made to that country. I don't think Link gets as much attention as he ought to. I know people in Hamilton remember him because he represented Hamilton, and there is a highway, the Lincoln Alexander Parkway in Hamilton, which of course everyone calls the link, yes, because it of course links you from one part of a town to another. But I'd love to see him get some more attention, particularly on his annual birthday, Lincoln Alexander Day. So there we go.
All right, Lincoln Alexander, we salute you.
Now, we generally don't wade into federal politics on this podcast, but we need to, because the whole country was talking about the speech that the Prime Minister gave at Davos earlier this week. Let's get into this a bit. What do you think?
Well, it was a very impressive speech. I can't confirm this as my own work, but I did see somebody on social media say that every major English language newspaper that he looked at had printed at least a substantial portion of the speech in their pages. So not just getting attention here in Canada, getting attention globally. If you did not catch the speech, and we'll give some excerpts in a moment, but this is Mark Carney basically saying that the age of American-led, American-managed globalization is over, and now smaller countries, middle powers, as he says, need to build their own network, their own systems to manage the world, basically. And, it echoes some of the things he was already saying since his election. And I think it's the correct diagnosis, if I can put it that way. And if you doubted that it was the correct diagnosis, President Donald Trump's speech the following day at Davos really made it clear that Carney was not just blowing smoke. I'll put it that way. Now, but the problem the Prime Minister faces, and this is also true provincially and frankly, of all Canadian policymakers, is that turning words into action here is really difficult, right? Steering the supertanker of the Canadian economy away from dependence on American trade and building networks with other countries, other major economic powers, is not just a 1 day, 1 year problem. It is a multi-year, and I would say probably a multi-decade problem. And whether that task is something that we can do over multiple election cycles will be the problem we face.
I think one of the things that was so powerful about the speech was that so many people had observed over the previous 9 months that Mr. Carney had been Prime Minister, that he had been, appeasing is a very tough word to use because it has such connotations
it's
with World War II. But people, a lot of people were asking, where's the elbows up, Mark? The elbows up were up. It was certainly a thing during the election campaign last year, and then it seems to have disappeared. But there was nothing mealy-mouthed about the speech. There was no appeasement. It was none of this, President Trump, you're such a transformational leader in the world today. No, it was, and I'll give a few quotes here, we are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. That's tough stuff. The middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. We know the old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. I got to tell you, I've known the last 10 Canadian prime ministers going all the way back to Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and I've been thinking really hard since Mark Carney gave the speech about any other Canadian prime minister who gave a speech of this significance. Standing ovation in Davos, very rare. And I can't think of one. I can't think of another Canadian Prime Minister's speech on an international stage that was as well received and admired as this one was. So there you go.
I don't think it was necessarily as well received or as admired, but the one that comes to mind is, at least the story that is told about it, is Lester Pearson speaking out against the Vietnam War before he went to go meet Lyndon Baines Johnson in the White House. And LBJ, a man famously of moderate temperament and not given to outbursts.
Not quite.
Remember
what he said?
Are we allowed to repeat it here on TVO?
It's a direct quote from a president.
Yeah, the line was something like, "You pissed on my rug."
Exactly right. He grabbed him by the lapels, put him up against the wall and said, "You pissed on my rug."
Yes. And Donald Trump did not quite say that at Davos, but made some not so veiled threats against Canada for...
I said, Mark Carney, you should be more grateful.
You should be more grateful, and Canada only exists because of us. So remember that next time you use your words or something like that.
Nice. Well, strange way to win friends and influence people, but he's the president and I'm not, so there you go.
There you go.
With that, let's get on to issue one. Late last week, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced he'd brokered a deal with China to allow 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles to enter the Canadian market. These vehicles will come into Canada at substantially lower tariff rates, and in exchange, China will lower its tariffs on our canola exports out of Western Canada. Ontario's Premier weighed in very quickly, saying he is not a fan and was very disappointed not to receive a heads up on the PM's plans. Doug Ford.
Well, I wouldn't say I was critical of the Prime Minister. I was very, very disappointed, as my colleagues behind me are very disappointed not to get a phone call, not to get a text message, and cutting a deal. The three of us, we have to take care of Ontario here. That's my number one job, to protect the people of Ontario. protect the jobs, protect communities, and that's what I'm going to continue to do.
Premier had some interesting company at the press conference. Unifor's head, Lana Payne, was there, so unions represented. Flavio Volpe from the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, representing car makers and so on, and people who are in the industry, was there as well. Ford also urged the federal government to scrap the federal EV mandate, which aims to get to 100% zero-emission vehicle sales by the year 2035. Analyze JMM if you would.
Right. So just to spell this out a bit more, under this agreement, Canada will allow 49,000 Chinese EVs to be imported. That's about as many cars as we imported prior to the imposition of the 100% tariffs that we did at the behest of the Biden administration. So the earliest beneficiary of this change in policy is not likely to be, you might have heard the names of some of these Chinese brands, right? BYD, Geely, Xiaomi. They are widely regarded as making excellent EVs. The first beneficiary is very likely to actually just be Tesla. They make cars in Shanghai, and they were importing cars from their Shanghai plant to Canada before the tariffs were imposed. And it's just going to take time for Chinese automakers to set up the whole sort of sales network that you need to sell cars in Canada. I expect that reasonably quickly we will see Chinese brands, and it's going to be very interesting. I kind of suspect that Tesla is not going to have a huge advantage for very long, but that is kind of just my speculation here. As the numbers get larger, there will be more room for more brands, so it'll be interesting to see. But let's just remember that Canada makes more than 1 million cars a year, so 49,000, even if as it grows to larger numbers, this is not a huge fraction of the overall Canadian market. Now, we heard Premier Ford there earlier. He has been saying that it's just a small percentage of the Canadian market is misleading, because it's as much as a third of all the EVs sold in Canada, and that's true because the EV sector is proportionately smaller. It's a small slice of the overall auto market. But if I can put it this way, I mean, automakers, Canadian automakers anyway, have kind of been whining nonstop about all the policies we have to try and cajole them into actually selling more EVs. They don't like the EV mandate. They don't like the subsidies. The only policy that they really strongly support is building more charging stations at public expense, right? So the position of the Premier and frankly others in the auto sector seems to be that they don't want to make EVs, they don't want to sell EVs, and they don't want anyone else to sell them either. So I'm not hugely sympathetic.
Well, here's the big question, which is there anything actually the Premier of Ontario can do about this? We know he's against it, but can he do anything?
Well, he can urge Ontarians not to buy these cars as they come in, which is what he did on Wednesday. The bully pulpit is something that any elected leader has available to them. In one sense, it doesn't cost Ford anything to urge people to boycott. We'll see. I don't think that people are going to not buy Teslas because Ford is telling people to. I don't think people understand that Tesla is a Chinese-made or will be a Chinese-made car. We'll see. Now, the broader question, I think, is can Ontario do things legally? And I almost don't want to manifest this stuff into the world, but yes, the reality is that the Ontario government has measures that it can take, right? Highways are provincial infrastructure that the province regulates who has access to, right? Separately from the federal regulations about is a car safe to drive or not, there are provincial regulations about whether cars can be allowed on provincial highways. And
are you saying what I think you're saying?
Well, the province would need to be very careful about how it were to design a law or a policy or whatever, because they've gotten themselves into trouble with stuff like this before. But yes, you could absolutely design a policy to make it very difficult to get Chinese vehicles actually certified and legal to use in Ontario. Just as a for example here, right? The Premier has talked about the Chinese cars as spy cars, right? The idea being that these are, they are sophisticated modern cars with all sorts of electronics on them. And the Premier seems to be alleging that all of the data they collect is going to get, funneled right back to Beijing or something. the province can pass consumer privacy legislation if it wants to. There are problems with that idea, right? The biggest one being that, the biggest one being that actually enforcing those kinds of rules would require a lot of technical sophistication, and the province would need to know what it's doing, and that's genuinely difficult. But the other big hurdle is that American-made and Canadian-made cars are also spying on you when you drive them. If you own a car made in the last 10 years, they're computers. They are collecting oodles of data on you, and they are selling that data on the open market. One licensing agreement from one automaker at one point was saying that they had the right to collect your sexual orientation and share that. I mean, as a person who believes in privacy laws and wants to see strong privacy policy, I think if Ontario wants to bring something forward, I think that's great. I am not holding my breath.
Obviously, Mark Carney's big play here is the hope that somewhere down the road, the Chinese are going to build an auto manufacturing assembly plant here in the province of Ontario. We'll see if that ever actually happens. But having said that, BYD, the company you mentioned, they already do have a manufacturing plant here, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's very funny, right? Back in 2019, BYD opened up a bus plant in Newmarket in which they build electric buses for the TTC, the Toronto Transit Commission. We have a picture of one that we can put up here. The buses have had some reliability issues. If I can put it bluntly, they do not seem to have necessarily been engineered for the rigors of a Canadian winter, even the relatively mild Canadian winters we get here in Toronto. But they are on the streets, and this plant has been there making vehicles that exist in Canada, have been operating on Ontario roads for almost the entire time that Doug Ford has been premier. This is not novel.
In which case, when can we expect to see BYD cars on the roads of the province of Ontario, provided Queen's Park doesn't make that illegal? At what time might that happen?
Well, so as I say, I think the first mover is likely to be Tesla. In theory, the CBC cited experts saying that we could see new Chinese brands enter the market as early as March. I think that's probably an aggressive estimate, if I could put it that way. But that is also when the lowered tariffs on canola are supposed to be phased in. And, let's just remember that this wasn't done in isolation, right? That Mark Carney was getting screamed at by Saskatchewan and other premiers, but most prominently Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, because the Chinese were not buying canola, and that's a big part of the Saskatchewan economy. So the Prime Minister was genuinely trying to balance different regional priorities in Canada. And there are also, regulatory hurdles here in Ontario, just going back to the question of when we might see cars here in Ontario. As I said, you have to get federal certifications. You have to get provincial certifications. We don't know if the province is going to be generous with its time in getting these things certified. One other point that I want to make is a lot of these cars it might be deceptive at first, right? Volvo is now a Chinese-owned company, right? GM also makes vehicles in China, though I don't know if they make any EVs there. So just because something has a familiar brand, it may actually still ultimately be a Chinese car. That said, we obviously the Prime Minister and frankly, the Premier has said it's a different story if the Chinese want to actually build a factory here and build and plug into the existing network of auto assembly services that we have here. If they want to do that, I imagine the Premier would be singing a different tune. His concern is that is not what we are currently talking about.
Exactly. Anything else here before we move on?
Let's just pull back for 1 second and just remind everybody of the context here. And this goes back to Mark Carney's speech as well, right? The only reason Mark Carney is in a position to make this deal is because of Donald Trump, right? Trump's threats against Canada helped Carney win the last election. Trump's continued abuses of his economic powers with tariffs have forced Canadian policymakers to look for new partners all around the world. At Wednesday's press conference, Brian Kingston said it was crucial for industry that Canada renew NAFTA or CUSMA or whatever we're calling it now, the agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada.
You smacka.
Smacka, right. Now, I think Kingston's right. I agree. More importantly, so does Mark Carney, right? Every Canadian policymaker would like to see NAFTA renegotiated and renewed and would love to see the stability that would bring. The problem, the whole entire problem in this whole situation is the White House. And any analysis of current events that doesn't put the spotlight on that problem first and foremost is, I would say, misleading the public.
And with that, we're motoring on to issue 2. For more than a decade, Ontario housing advocates lobbied the provincial government to let cities use something called inclusionary zoning to get more affordable homes built, particularly in the most expensive cities. This month, the Ford government signaled that it's pressing pause on those rules. I have Ontario's resident housing nerd sitting across from me here, so perhaps the best guy to ask, what's going on here?
Right, so we made it to the second week of the year before I managed to sneak in a housing story.
There you go.
So, inclusionary zoning is a policy where, as part of the planning process for new housing development, the government extracts a commitment from the builder to provide some number of new homes specifically for lower income people. So a city might say, okay, well, you're going to build a condo tower with 400 new apartments in it, and we're going to demand that you set aside 40, so like 10%, right? There are different kinds of inclusionary zoning. This is a very sort of diverse policy. Probably the biggest divide, the most important divide, is whether a government that is demanding these set-asides makes any kind of subsidy available or does not. In Ontario's case, there were not generally subsidies available. When there is no subsidized funding available, then inclusionary zoning does function more like a tax than other methods. And so that's always been one of the complaints about it, that it can provide some units of affordable housing, but only by making housing generally less affordable. So in Ontario, there were attempts to get inclusionary zoning passed through the Liberal years under Kathleen Wynne. That government did eventually bring forward inclusionary zoning rules right before they lost the 2018 election. The Ford government then abandoned inclusionary zoning for the most part, then did eventually bring it back more recently, specifically as part of their planning rules around what they called major transit station areas. So subway, GO train, and light rail stations around the GTA. Municipalities were allowed to pass planning rules that said, if you're going to build these big condo towers around these transit stations, which is where we want to put these condos, then you have to set aside a certain amount for affordable housing.
And what is the big change that's happened this month?
So it's been a long and winding road, and it got a little bit windier this month. The province has proposed to pause inclusionary zoning rules in Toronto, Mississauga, and Kitchener. Those are the only 3 cities that currently have these rules on the books. The pause would continue until July of 2027, which likely means that even if the pause isn't simply extended further, given how long approvals take in Ontario, that probably means that no new projects involving inclusionary zoning would break ground until after the next election.
They were so gung-ho on this. Why are they pushing the pause button?
Well, for now, they're saying that this is just a proposal. They have posted it to the Environmental Registry, where these kinds of policies get posted for public comment. This is what Housing Minister Rob Flack had to say on Tuesday in Toronto.
Let's be blunt. We are in a housing crisis. We're not getting a lot built. We're looking at all avenues to get shovels in the ground faster. And it's great to have inclusionary zoning, but if people aren't going to build, it still doesn't provide enough affordable housing. So we're taking it out to the market, listening to what people have to say, listening to the Mayor of Toronto, listening to the City of Toronto, and doing our very best to get shovels in the ground faster. So we're taking an advisory stance right now, listening and learning, and stay tuned. We got more things coming in the spring legislation to help accelerate getting more homes built. Thank you.
Stay tuned, he says.
Right. And so the window for public comment has now closed. And in theory, the government could make a decision at any time. But the timing really is going to be tricky here because of the election calendar, right? Toronto, the biggest city with the most application processes, that or at least relevant in this case with inclusionary zoning, they hold their last really substantive council meeting in July. And it's always a fascinating agenda when that last meeting gets posted, because there's hundreds of development applications, because the developers, who can read a calendar as well as anybody, they want to get their applications in before there's a months-long break where they're going to have to just wait and wait and wait. So if the province deep sixes inclusionary zoning rules early in this year, that could cause the cities, and particularly Toronto, to reconsider some of these planning applications and say, well, like, if we're not getting affordable housing out of this, then we're going to go back to the drawing board and we're going to force you to go through the applications process all over again. That would force these projects to be delayed, in some cases for, it could be a year. And that's exactly the opposite of what the province is trying to accomplish with this, of getting more homes built faster.
As long as we're on the subject of municipal elections, we should give people a heads up that next week we are going to do a sort of a special early focus on municipal elections, because this is the year when 444 municipalities in the province are going to hold municipal elections.
Yes, absolutely, everywhere in the province. And we're probably not going to be able to cover every single municipal council, but we are going to try over the next year.
I can guarantee that. Yes, indeed. And with that, off to issue 3. Earlier this week, ROMA, the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, held its annual conference. It's a chance for rural leaders to connect with one another and their urban counterparts to talk about, some of the challenges they're facing right now. JMM here moderated a discussion at the conference, so give us a bit of the 411 on that.
Right. So, the ROMA conference, despite being held in Toronto, is focused on the issues of rural municipalities. And it's a counterpart to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference that is held in August, which we've spoken about on the podcast before. And, I really want to stress that small rural towns are different from big cities in more than just degree, right? So, for example, I moderated this panel about rural infrastructure, and we talked a lot about water and sewer costs, and these are the kinds of infrastructure that really are like a prerequisite for getting more homes built. That is something that the government wants to see more of. But for a town of, let's say, 50,000 people, they just really have a hard time making the math work if they need to pay for water infrastructure for, let's say, a new subdivision of 1,000 homes, if they can't use development charges, right? Those taxes on new homes that both the provincial and federal governments have been urging municipalities to lower, saying that it's making it harder and more expensive to get homes built in Ontario, right? In a big city like Toronto, right, development charges are, if I can put it this way, they're kind of a luxury, right? Toronto's tax base is large enough that they can raise property taxes to pay for the stuff they need to, and development charges are kind of a nice to have. But for that hypothetical town of 50,000 people, it's just really, really difficult for them to plausibly finance water, sewer, roads out of a tax base where the kind of tax increase that would be politically very, very painful for them, right? Raising taxes 5, sometimes 10% in a year to pay for the necessities, that might still only raise them $100,000, $150,000, right? We're just talking about towns that are just so small and the money is politically extremely painful to get their hands on, and it doesn't raise that much to begin with. So they are really worried that as the government starts talking more seriously about lowering development charges, and Housing Minister Flack did say that they're going to take another crack at that this year, they're really worried that they are going to be left without development charges, but not provided with an alternative. So
worst of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the government has talked a lot about this alternative that they want to explore about municipal services corporations. They've been talking about that for some time. It hasn't gone terribly far, but we will be watching this year to see if they get more serious about it.
Gotcha. What else you hear down there at Roma?
So the other panel I moderated was on economic development and how, smaller municipalities are trying to adjust to the economic chaos of the Trump years. We've heard a lot from both the Premier and the Prime Minister about the need for big nation-building projects, pipelines and ports and nuclear reactors. And, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that, big things are made up of lots of little things, if I can put it that way. So, when the province says it wants to build new nuclear reactors, that's obviously a really big economic project for a place like Port Hope, where one of these reactors has been proposed, but it's also big economic news all over the province. Or if I could take what I think is a funnier example, right, the Eglinton Crosstown, if it...
What's funny about that?
Well, exactly. But, the one thing I've just always remembered since the project began construction, right, the concrete liners on the inside of the tunnel of the crosstown, they are made in a place called Utopia, Ontario, which is just west of Barrie, right? And so even that like quintessentially Toronto project has an economic impact elsewhere in the province. So, these are big projects that, a lot of smaller communities are hoping to see them revive their fortunes or improve their fortunes. And, one last thing I will say is that one thing that came through in this panel, it was a really interesting panel with lots of topics, but there's just so much experimentation going on at the local level right now. Everyone is trying to come up with new models and how do you connect businesses in your community with new customers, since the default customer of first and last resort in the United States is no longer a reliable partner, right? So more than one time I heard people compare the current situation to COVID, right? Where everybody had to learn how to be flexible. Everybody had to pivot. Everybody had to, sometimes overnight, they had to change their business models. I think of the distillers who started making hand sanitizer, right? It is exciting in that sense, right? People are being really inventive, being really entrepreneurial in that sense. But like with COVID, everyone really wishes it wasn't necessary.
Gotcha. Shall we talk about our columns?
Let's do it.
Off to your column, my column. Time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns we wrote for the TVO website over the past week. Start us off, if you would.
So I had the misfortune of writing 2 columns about the issue of Chinese trade in EVs. One before the agreement was announced, where I think I said I didn't expect much to come of the agreement. So, whoops, got that one wrong. In my defense, Carney's own people were telling people not to expect too much out of it. And then I wrote a follow-up column after the agreement was announced. We've already talked about the agreement quite a bit, so I don't want to rehash all of it. But I do want to just hammer one point that I made in the second column, that Canada's policy and Ontario's policy was sort of the definition of unsustainable. And I mean that in the sense that economist Herbert Stein once said, something that cannot go on forever will eventually stop. and I think we were never going to keep Chinese cars out of Ontario and out of Canada forever. So the question was, under what circumstances were we going to admit them? And could we extract some kind of advantage to Canada, to Ontario, for that change? Obviously, lots of fair grounds to question whether we are going to, maximize Canada's gain here. But like, some people really seem to have been under the impression that we were just going to keep Chinese cars out forever, and I don't think that was realistic or sustainable. So,
Gotcha. I'm still focused on this Ontario Liberal leadership campaign, which is happening, even though you don't hear a whole heck of a lot about it.
Yes.
The party still has not figured out where the leadership election will take place, what the criteria are for the candidates who want to get in, when it's going to be taking place, right? Is it going to be sooner or later down the road? So I've got a column this week that asks a bunch of questions. I guess the foremost of which is the last 2 elections, well, actually, frankly, the last 3 elections that the Ontario Liberal Party has lost, the party was led by 3 veteran politicians.
Yes.
Kathleen Wynne, Stephen Del Duca, Bonnie Crombie. Is it time for a genuine outside-the-box choice for the next leader? As in, not somebody with a seat, not somebody with a great deal of political experience, but somebody who is a real flyer from a conventional political wisdom point of view. And so to that end, I had a chat with a guy named Eric Lombardi, who's 31 years old, and whom you have referenced before on this show as a guy who's done a lot of good work in the housing space, right? Better Homes Toronto. Or
More Neighbours Toronto.
More Neighbours Toronto, Build Canada. He does the Build Ontario, the Build Toronto part of that. Anyway, he's a very strong housing advocate. He is hoping to mobilize fellow millennials and maybe even some Gen Zs and Gen Xers as well. The real reality of winning a leadership convention is that, you can be brilliant. You can have a million great ideas. Can you sign people up and can you get them to come out and vote for you? I mean, that's essentially what it is at the end of the day. And Lombardi's got, I guess, a bit of a strategy to focus on post-secondary campuses where there'd be a lot of younger Ontarians, many of whom would like to live in a home that they own at some point in their lives, and right now figure that's never going to happen. Yeah. If he can activate that post-secondary base, he might have a shot at doing something there. If he can, again, appeal to others of his generation, maybe he can get something going. He won't be the only sort of non-traditional politician trying to make that happen. The Ajax MP, Rob Serjanik, is in his mid-30s. Dr. Danielle Martin, Dr. Andrew Buzari, they are also people from outside traditional politics who are taking a look right now at the leadership. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, you did a column about this a little while ago, where I guess we really sort of need the Liberal Party to kind of, figure out where things are at, right? When's this happening?
Yeah.
What's going down?
Yeah.
And when that happens, we'll kind of figure out who's going to get into this race and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, on the issue of should the Liberals take a flyer, I will reiterate something that I have said before on the podcast, that I don't want to make an iron law declaration that the next Liberal leader should be somebody who has a seat in the legislature or has a very easy path towards getting one. But as I say, I've said this before on the podcast, I do think that for multiple elections in a row now, the Liberals have told themselves, well, it's not that important to have a seat in the legislature. It's not that important for the leader to be at Queen's Park every day. And then the election happens, they get a really disappointing result, and people look around and say, oh, actually, maybe they should have had a seat in the legislature after all.
Those seats are harder to win than you think.
It's true. Yes.
Especially if you're from outside. If you haven't got one, they're hard to get sometimes.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to the mailbag, because as you know, if you've got a burning question or insightful comment, we always love hearing from you at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, what's up this week?
We have an email from listener Niro Kulendra Raja in Ottawa, who writes, Hi, Steve and JMM. In a year where Quebec and Alberta are likely to have separation-related votes, either a general election focusing on that issue in Quebec or a potential referendum in Alberta, what are the impacts for Ontario, both as a province internally and its relationship to the Federation? My sense is that Ontario, across governments, saw itself as playing an important unifier role in previous crises, perhaps not always so helpfully. Can the province still play that role in a federation undergoing a national unity crisis? Will we want to? Many thanks for all your work and analysis. As a GTHA transplant, go Tiger Cats, in the national capital, TVO and this podcast are my lifeline for provincial and local news in the federal bubble. Cheers, Nero.
Nero, love the Tycat reference there. That's a thing of beauty. Let's start by saying that there certainly has been this tradition that Ontario premiers play, be it John Robarts putting together the Confederation of Tomorrow Conference in 1967, be it Bill Davis, who represented Ontario at the 1971 Victoria Conference, and then a decade later in the nation's capital to repatriate the Constitution with a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And let's not forget David Peterson offering to give up Senate seats to get the Meech Lake Constitutional Accord passed, or Bob Rae, who was there with a front row center seat to put his signature on the Charlottetown Accord. So that is a traditional mediating role that Ontario premiers play. Not so much lately, with increasing difficulty lately. I think a lot of first ministers in this province have been sort of spooked about getting too much involved in constitutional issues or national unity issues for fear of taking their eye off the puck here in the province of Ontario. Yeah. But, what say you?
Yeah, I think, recently Doug Ford has not exactly played, and by recently I mean literally in the last few weeks, right? Doug Ford has not necessarily played the unifying role that other Ontario premiers have, and that Doug Ford has previously in his own career, right?
Pouring that whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. This spat with Diageo has raised the irritation of Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, who's saying, hey, we're all one country here. If this plant closure in Ontario still preserves jobs in Manitoba, don't make it my problem, basically. And even, we mentioned this before, right? Even with this deal with Chinese auto imports, Scott Moe is out here saying, actually, from his perspective, this is a great deal for Saskatchewan. It's going to help canola farmers. And the position of Ontario, if you wanted it to be that unifying role, would have to reflect some of that. And this week, or at least the last week or so, we haven't seen that unifying perspective. But to be fair, right, that's just a snapshot, and the snapshot does not cover, I think, the entirety of the role that Ford has played in the last few years.
That was very diplomatically put.
Well, I got up on a soapbox earlier, so I'm being a bit more diplomatic now.
There you go. That's good. Let's give the email address and get out of here.
Absolutely. Again, if you'd like to ask about content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, January 23rd, 2026.
You can follow our show wherever you get your podcasts so you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first, last name, and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced by Matthew O'Mara, editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Laurie Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
At this time in the show, we always give thanks to the crew for making the studio look so good, but really this week, because it's first time in our brand new studio, or let's call it the redecorated, renovated William G. Davis studio.
Rejuvenated.
Rejuvenated. I like that even better. Here on the ground floor of 2180 Yonge Street. So thanks so much, everybody. And Sheldon, you want me to go back over here to do this quick reminder? Yes, you do. Our first TVO Today Live of 2026 is coming up this Saturday. We are talking about what kind of military Canada now needs for the 21st century. There are a few tickets left. They are free, and you can get them by going to this website, tvo.org/TVO Today Live. So join us in Hangar A of the Bombardier Center for Aerospace and Aviation at Centennial College's dedicated aerospace campus. That's Saturday, Jan 24, 2 p.m. We'd love to see you. And until next Friday, back over to camera one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.